Let's listen to this.
There's no such thing as PTSD. There's no such thing as OCD. There's no such thing as ADHD. Those are noble lies to basically give the excuse to, in the end of the day, to medicate people. And Big Pharma is in charge of a lot of that. If you understand, take PTSD for example. What that really is grief. You are fighting a war, you lost your buddies. You have a certain amount of survival guilt because you made it back, they didn't. How do you deal with grief? Grief is a real thing. But grief is part of life. And if you can't navigate grief, you can't live life. But if you clinically define that, you can give them a pill, a series of medications, and they end up in LA homeless on the sidewalk. This is in regard to children, it's the most deadly thing that's been unleashed on children, medication. We're trying to make clear to parents that behavior is essentially the result of choices that kids make. And if you parent them properly, they'll make right choices. But if you blame it on something other than their choices, and you identify them as having something they can't do anything about, but medicated, you literally are turning your child into a potential, not only a potential drug addict, but maybe a potential criminal, because they never learn how to navigate life in a socially acceptable way.
Now, most Christians that have already heard this already came bashing John Mcauthur. Because why? Because they're not listening. He did not say that there was no such thing as the symptoms of PTSD. He is talking about the title, giving it a name. Because in order to give someone medication, they have to meet a certain criteria. It has to be a name. You need a diagnosis to give someone medication, because medication is where they make a lot of money. That is what he was saying. He wasn't saying there's no such thing as the symptoms. He's saying there's no such thing as the diagnosis. Remember, he said this.
If you understand, take PTSD for example. What that really is grief. You are fighting a war, you lost your buddies. You have a certain amount of survival guilt because you made it back, they didn't. How do you deal with grief? Grief is a real thing. But grief is part of life. And if you can't navigate grief, you can't live life. But if you clinically define that.
See, he wasn't saying that the symptoms that they're calling PTSD isn't a thing. He was explaining what it is, and he's telling you that Big Pharma, the people who make their money off giving you medication for it, that's why it's no such thing. It's no such thing as PTSD as far as the title. As far as the symptoms, it is the symptoms of grief. It's post-traumatic stress disorder. That's the title that they're giving it so they can medicate you, so you can stay in that PTSD state. That's what he was explaining. He wasn't saying that it wasn't a thing. He's saying that the diagnosis that this world is giving it is not a thing. And you have to learn how to get through grief, like we get through the death of someone that we love. We get through it somehow. And that's what he's telling you to do. Get through it. Get through your grief. We need Christ to get through it. This is the thing. Everybody's been going off, saying he wrong, all this. But then they'll turn around and say, I can do all things through Christ that strengthens me. And so that's why he gave the scripture in Philippians 4:8. All those things, whatever's good, whatever's kind, think on these things. Why? Because post-traumatic stress disorders, all these type of mental illness deals with the mind. And you need your mind to be filled with the things of God, because that's how you can get through it. But people are choosing to get through it by using the way of the world, by saying, oh, I have PTSD. Can I get medication? And so that way you will stay on medication and you will never get right, because you're dependent on the medication versus dependent on God. That is what he's saying. He's not saying that there is no such thing as all those symptoms that you're having that they're calling PTSD. It's just that the title that they're giving, the diagnosis that they're giving, it's not a thing. They're calling it that to get the money from and have you crazy off the medication. And this coming from somebody whose mother was diagnosed with a mental illness ever since I was a kid, and they put her on medication and she never got right. She got worse. All she was doing was getting worse. If she got off the medication, she got worse. And then one day she realized this medication they're using is keeping me sick. It's keeping me off. That's how they're making money off me. She ended up getting her mind right and saying, I am no longer taking this medication. And she has not been taking that medication and has been doing fine without it. But her mind is clear. And she realized that the medication is what kept her mind gone. And so now she says she has never been this lucid and this clear-headed since she's been completely off the medication. Because when I was growing up, when she got off the medication and we see her acting a fool, we get her committed, put her in there, put her right back on the medication. But this time, now that I have Christ and I understand, when she did this 2 years ago and said, I'm done, I'm not taking the medication, I didn't fight it. I was in agreement with her. Yeah, Mom, stop taking it. And she has not been taking it. And she's been doing just fine without it. And that is the point that Mcauthur is trying to make. He was not saying that there's no such thing as the symptoms. He was saying that there's no such thing as the diagnosis. And as far as ADHD, he is absolutely correct, especially for me working in a pediatric clinic and seeing every time you turn around, these parents want to give these kids ADHD medication because they refusing to actually raise their children and tell them they need to stop acting a fool and raise them up in the admonition of the Lord. They don't even do that. Even if they don't choose God, you're still supposed to raise them up. You're supposed to actually raise them. But they want the medication to raise them because they don't want to deal with that behavior person. They want the medicine to do their job. But it's understandable why. Because our generation got weapons when we act a fool. We got punishment. We didn't have all these electronics and all these things to disturb us. That's why our generation don't really roll up on it ADHD era. They had an ADHD era now because they done stopped. They done made whooping your kids against the law. So now these people ain't whooping their kids and they acting a fool so they can lead you to the ADHD diagnosis and you can keep getting them rich by putting them on these medications. That is what John Mcauthur was saying, and that